Hello, investigators, and welcome to Until the End of Time. My name is Werner. Thank you for joining me. This video is going to be a recap video of all the news in June 2021 for the Arkham Horror LCG. FFG decided to make June kind of a Arkham-themed month. There was a lot of news, a lot of things going on, and so in order to make sure that you don't miss anything and maybe catch you up on some of the details you might have missed, this video is going to go into depth onto all the topics that were covered this month and explain what's going on. So first and foremost, there's of course a new cycle that just got announced that also comes with a new release model. There is a revised core set on the way. There is a new parallel investigator. There was a new FAQ and Taboo update. And finally, I just wanted to mention that the release of the Return to the Circle Undone is both happening in some places, but also hasn't happened yet in some places. I think America is staying behind a bit because of shipping issues. I'm not going to go into that any further this video, but I just wanted to mention that is a thing that's happening. Okay, so first and foremost, To the Edge of the Earth, a new deluxe expansion, and well, also just a new way of releasing Arkham. So, as of Edge of the Earth, there will be no more Mythos packs. Instead, the campaigns and cards will be distributed in two big boxes, one being a Investigator expansion and one being a Campaign expansion. The Investigator expansion contains everything we've come to expect from a campaign's worth of player cards, so 5 new Investigators and about 250 new player cards. And then the scenario, or the Campaign expansion, comes with 300 scenario cards and a campaign that I believe is similarly sized to previous ones, and supposedly happens between 4 and 10 sessions. And this immediately showcases one of the awesome new things about this model, because the entire campaign is now in a single box and you do not have to wait a month between packs. Maxine can put a whole bunch of non-linear story or optional story in a box and not worry that you're buying a Mythos pack that contains a scenario that you're not even going to play. So this is awesome. There are definitely some concerns. The main one being voiced is that there will now be a much bigger gap between releases, so that maybe makes the game go a little stale from time to time. But on the other hand, we've been racked by supply line issues. We've been recently, people have issues getting the product, and this should help alleviate some of the stress there. It also just makes a lot of sense, I think, to not build products that are then split into 7 different products, 6 Mythos packs in a deluxe box, that then have to be stored somewhere, they have to go onto a shelf. There's a lot of logistical reasons why this model just makes a lot more sense, and with the game being as kind of experienced and old as it is, because it's been going for a couple of years now, so it's got some momentum under its belt. This seems like a good move. It seems like a move that FFG is willing to make and should work out well. This new expansion is going to come with 5 new investigators. We already know which 5. If you look at the image on screen right now, you can actually see them. From left to right is Daniela, and then Monterey Jack, I don't know exactly how to pronounce that, Bob, Norman, who was previously released as a book promo investigator, and Lily Chen. In addition, based on the article and kind of other rumors we've heard, it seems safe to assume that all 5 of them will be sharing Norman-style deck building, which is to say that they start out as one class and then transition into a second class as they level up. More on that when we start talking about Lily Chen. So Lily Chen was the investigator highlighted in the release article, or in the announcement article rather. She's a mystic, she's the martial artist, 3 willpower, 2 intellect, 4 combat, 3 agility. She's a chosen and warden traded. You begin the game with each discipline in your deck in play, Unbroken Sight face up. We'll look at what those disciplines do in a second. And then an Elder Sign effect, +2. After this test ends, flip a broken discipline you control to its Unbroken Sight. She has 7 health and 7 sanity. And Lily is going to come with 4 different disciplines, 1 for each of the stats. Each of the disciplines is a permanent asset that gives her +1 to the relevant stat, and then an action ability to basically break that discipline and get some powerful effect. For example, Alignment of Spirit gives her +1 willpower, and she can take an action to take a direct damage to heal 3 horror, or take a direct horror to deal 3 damage. Then she must flip the asset over, and then to the right you can see that the broken alignment of spirit no longer gives +1 willpower, and then has a reaction ability. After the round ends, if you took no damage or horror this round, flip this asset over to its unbroken side. Likewise, discipline balance of body has the Lily Chain the currently permanent +1 agility, and then an action, one at a time, take up to 3 different fight or evade actions. Flip this asset over, and it doesn't provoke attack opportunity because it is still this action you're taking that then triggers a bunch of fight or evade actions. And then the balance of body broken side, after the round ends, if no enemies were at the same location as you at any point this round, flip it back over to its unbroken side. So what we see here is permanent assets that give +1 to a stat, which makes her stat line, which is a little, it's the right number of points, but it's a little underwhelming. You can put 1 extra point in here with the discipline you choose to include at the start of your deck, by having these, by including the discipline of the choice of the ability you want. But it also gives this powerful ability that you then have to fix somehow. And the way to fix them is something that you don't have perfect control over. So it's a bit tricky. We also know there are going to be ones for combat and intellect, but we don't know what those do yet. What we also know is that Lily is going to have the ability to have more than one of these disciplines, because for every 15 XP she earns, she gets to add another copy into her deck. However, when she does, she also has to add a subsequent copy of her weakness, Burden of Destiny, which has the revelation ability, either flip a destiny you control to its broken side and it cannot flip back this round, or take a damage and a horror. I think this is a very interesting and kind of complicated investigator, which I don't mind. I think it's nice to have multiple options, and I think Lily is definitely on the more complicated side of the spectrum, but she should still be playable, even if you're relatively new to the game. But at 0 XP, she's going to have one of these disciplines, and then at 45 XP, she potentially has up to 4 of these, making her stat line 4 willpower, 3 intellect, 5 combat, and 4 agility, which is of course very, very strong. And she'll have 4 different action abilities that let her do powerful things. That seems really cool. I really like this design. I think it's exciting. I think it's wild. I just think we don't know most of her cards, and we already know that there's a bunch of different builds we can take with her. And that's not even including her deck building, because we know that she has access to Mystic cards because she's a Mystic. But based on the cards in the release article, showing 3 of them here, Lily seems to be focusing a lot on level 0 Mystic cards and then Guardian cards with XP on them, which leads us to believe that she has Norman Withers style deck building, where she can take level 0 Mystic cards, 5 level 0 Guardian cards, and then level 1 to 5 Guardian cards, but no XP Mystic cards. Which is, again, interesting. We'll have to see how it plays out. Her leveling into a Guardian means that she's probably going to be the group's primary fighter, but she might be able to use her Mystic access to get clues and still do other things, which is super cool. Now, speaking of these cards, we have the Dragon Pole, which is a 3-cost 0 XP asset in the Mystic faction. Single combat icon, item, weapon, melee, and it takes up 2 hand slots. You get a +1, you have an additional arcane slot, so you can have 1 more spell while you're holding this Dragon Pole. And then it has an action to fight. You get +1 combat for this attack for each of your arcane slots that is filled. If at least 2 of your arcane slots are filled, this attack deals +1 damage. And it's important to note here that this weapon does not exhaust when you use it. So if you have 2 arcane slots filled, this is just action fight, +2 combat, +1 damage, which is very strong. As such, I expect this card to see quite a bit of play, especially in Mystics that start out at 3 combat. Of course, Lily starts out at 4 combat, so she's definitely picking this up. And we'll have to see how this plays out. Otherwise, we have a couple of other cards that give you additional arcane slots, and I wouldn't be surprised to see some kind of massive amounts of arcane slot build with this card. It is the kind of Mystic card that requires you to have a lot of setup before you get to do anything, because obviously, if you just play this and you have no arcane slots filled, this does nothing. And even with only a single arcane slot filled, it isn't that good. So you're going to have to be drawing a bunch of cards, playing a bunch of cards, and that's just the usual Mystic playstyle of needing to find all your assets, put them down. So yeah, I like that it's still very much in that Mystic theme of setting up, but then it is very powerful when it pays you off. And I actually wouldn't be surprised to see this maybe splashed out of faction here or there. There are some arcane slot cards, even in Guardian. Spiritual Resolve comes to mind. And the weapon's really strong when you get it going. Next up, speaking of weapons that take up 2 hand slots, we have the Butterfly Swords. Another 3-cost asset, this one's 2 XP though. Combat and Agility icon, item, weapon, melee. And an action to fight. You get +1 combat for this attack. That's it. But after this attack, you may exhaust the Butterfly Swords to fight again, adding your agility to your skill value for that attack, and the attack deals +1 damage. So the first attack deals 1 damage, and then the second attack deals 2 damage. You don't have to succeed on the first attack to do the second attack, but presumably you'd want to. This card is interesting. Making 2-hand weapons that only deal 1 damage on a normal attack is, well, I would say bad, but it isn't. But it's strange, because obviously a lot of the time we bring weapons to deal more damage to enemies. And this is very good at dealing with 3 health enemies, because it lets you attack once, then attack a second time, and assuming both of those attacks hit, you can just kill a 3 health enemy with no extra attacks, 1 action, which is quite good. And it doesn't use any ammo or anything like that. But if you get swarmed by multiple enemies or more than 3 health worth enemies, these weapons start looking a lot worse very quickly. Obviously, Bandolier is a card in Guardian, which gives you 2 extra hand slots for weapons. That might be something to consider here. There's also the idea of using some of the fight events from the Nathaniel Cho pack to kind of act as backup weapons if you need it. I think this card is interesting. I think at 2 XP, I'm gonna have to think really carefully about including it, because I just don't want to be stuck in a situation where I have to deal with some big 4 health enemy, and I just can't do it because I don't have enough damage. And it's also worth saying that that 3 damage is assuming the first attack hits, but the first attack only gives you +1 combat. So I'm not saying this card is bad, to be clear. I think this card is probably better than it looks, but it's tricky and it asks a couple of things of you that you don't normally have to worry about with weapons. So definitely interested in trying it. And then finally, Sweeping Kick, a 1-cost 1 XP Guardian event, combat and agility icons again. Spirit, Tactic, Trick. Rita can take it, Calvin can take it. I think those are the 2 main ones that care about Spirit and Trick specifically. And then what it does is fight. Add your agility to your skill value for this attack. The attack deals +1 damage. If you succeed, automatically evade the attacked enemy. This card is great. It's basically a fight that gets a stunning blow and a vicious blow in the attack. And when I mentioned Rita and Calvin, I think they both like this card. It lets you just punch a big enemy, automatically evade it, deal some damage, and it's only 1 XP. I just think you're going to be playing this card. Nathaniel Cho likes this card because he gets to do 2 extra damage with this fight. This is cheap, effective, powerful, everything you want in a card, basically. If you're Guardian, this kills enemies for you. Next up, let's talk briefly about Norman Withers. So Norman was already released as a book promo in Ire of the Void, right? But he's getting his official printing in Edge of the Earth. And you can see his original signatures on the bottom there, Split the Angle and Vengeful Hound. But let's talk about, well, the Investigator and his new signatures. So Norman Withers is the Astronomer, 4 willpower, 5 intellect, 2 combat and 1 agility. He's Miskatonic traded. And he plays with the top card of his deck revealed. Once per round, you may play the top card of your deck as if it were in your hand, at -1 cost. So you get to look at the top card of your deck at any time, you get to play them, which is basically the same as drawing a card, because it's a card you didn't have to draw in order to play, and then the new top card of your deck is the card you're going to draw next. And it gives you a -1 resource cost, so that's pretty good. Now, of course, after a weakness is revealed while on top of your deck, you have to draw it. And then an Elder Sign effect, plus X, you may swap the top card of your deck with the card in your hand. X is the resource cost of the top card of your deck. 6 health, 8 sanity. Pretty standard there. So Norman is a Seeker who upgrades into Mystic. He takes level 0 Seeker cards and then level 1 to 5 Mystic cards and 5 level 0 Mystic cards. And he plays with the top card of his deck a bit, which is interesting. But with his new signatures, he might have some other new awesome things he can be doing, because originally Norman didn't really like skill cards, because he can only play the top card of his deck, he can't commit them. So if you got a skill card stuck at the top of his deck, he couldn't use his ability. Well, we fixed that with Livre des Bons. I think that's how you pronounce that. It's the Hyperborean Grimoire, 2-cost asset, 2 willpower icons, and a wild icon, item, relic, and tome. Norman's deck only. And a free trigger to exhaust the tome. Swap the top card of your deck with a card in your hand. So if there's a card on top of your deck that you just need right now, or maybe there's a card in your hand that you just want to play with his discount, you can do it that way. And a second free triggered ability to exhaust the tome. Commit the top card of your deck to an eligible skill test performed by an investigator at your location. So you can now use the tome to commit cards from the top of your deck. This seems fantastic, and we'll talk about a couple more cards that care about skills when we talk about the other cards coming in Edge of the Earth. But suffice to say, this card alone makes me want to put skill cards in Norman. And I haven't actually played Norman that much, but I'm definitely excited to try him, and he might be one of my investigators for a blind playthrough of Edge of the Earth. Now, of course, this new signature comes with a new weakness, the Harbinger. Omen and End Time traded. Revelation, place this card on top of your deck. While the Harbinger is revealed and on top of your deck, cards in your deck cannot be searched, drawn, or manipulated in any way except by the below ability. Action, discard the Harbinger. This ability may be activated while the Harbinger is on top of your deck, as if it were in your threat area. So, basically, the Harbinger is going to get stuck on top of your deck, and then you have to deal with it somehow. Well, you have to deal with it by spending 2 actions. It's worth saying that the way this is worded, because it says on top of your deck, presumably Norman is the only one who can activate this ability. Normally, treacheries that get stuck in your threat area are ones that other investigators can manipulate, but because of the wording of this one, it's probably only Norman. And that's probably fine. It's a weakness that really just says you can't really draw cards or do anything with your ability until you spend 2 actions to clear it, but it doesn't otherwise really hurt him or do anything but waste a little bit of time. As far as weaknesses go, it's not the greatest, but it's not the worst either. So we have some more revealed cards for Edge of the Earth. We have, specifically for what is probably going to be in Norman's deck, Written in the Stars is a 0 XP Seeker event, 1 cost and a wild icon, insight rated. Fast, play only during your turn. Discard the top card of your deck. If that card is a weakness, shuffle it back into your deck. Otherwise, for the remainder of your turn, while that card is in your discard pile, commit it to each eligible skill test you perform. So, this is kind of turning anyone into Amanda for a turn, which is that you can put 1 card into every skill test you perform that turn. But if you're Norman, you always know what the top card of your deck is. So Written in the Stars becomes a lot more reliable because you can play it knowing that the next card you're going to be, or the card you're going to be discarding, is a skill card you want to use multiple times. And if you've played Amanda a bit, you know that reusing the same deduction multiple times, or even just a perception to draw a bunch of cards, can be very, very powerful. So this seems like a good card that outside of Norman may take a little bit of effort to get set up, but I think it's worth potentially doing some pretty broken stuff with it. Next up we have the Astronomical Atlas, a 3 XP, 3 cost mystic asset, item and tome traded, takes up a hand slot. I should mention it has a willpower icon and 2 intellect icons, and a free triggered ability, exhaust the Atlas. Look at the top card of your deck. If it's not a weakness, attach it face down to the Atlas. Max 5 cards attached. And then a free triggered ability, commit a card attached to Astronomical Atlas to an eligible skill test. If the test succeeds, add that card to your hand instead of discarding it. Limit once per test. So this lets you draw a bunch of extra cards, which Mystics love. And it also lets you put an extra bunch of cards in extra skill tests, which, I mean, everybody loves, right? I really like this design. I think it's pretty strong. If you have a deck that has enough skill icons on it and you take frequent enough skill tests, this basically is going to draw you a card every single turn because you just exhaust it, put the top card under it, and then use that card, which that alone seems really good. And then, of course, let's not forget, it just gives you some extra icons on most tests. Like, that's worth something. So yeah, I really like this design. I really think it's really cool. I don't have anything bad to say about it, really. Parallel Daisy. This is one of the few tomes that the Parallel Daisy side can use that Original Daisy can't, because it's a 3 XP Mystic card. Just something to think about. Moving on to multi-class cards, we have the first multi-class card since the Circle Undone, and it is a Seeker Mystic asset Divination, 1 XP, 3 cost, and it has an intellect icon. It's spell and augury traded, uses 4 charges, and then an action to investigate. For this investigation, you may use willpower instead of intellect, and you get +1 skill value. If you succeed, spend 1 or 2 charges. Instead of discovering a clue at your location, discover 1 clue at your location for each charge spent. If you succeed by 0, choose and discard a card from your hand. So we know that the Edge of the Earth will have a bunch of multi-class cards. There's a couple more actually on the next slide. But this is one that, for example, Norman can use because it is a Mystic level 1 card, even though he can take Seeker level 1 cards. That being said, it's also not the best card. It's not terrible, but at 3 cost and 1 XP, I'd really like to get more than 4 clues total, because for every charge you spend, you're going to get 1 clue at most. Now, you're also going to get 1 clue at least, because you don't waste charges on skill tests that fail, but it's still not great. I might see it in some Mystic decks, especially as a backup spell. Sometimes you just need a little bit more cluing, but I think this card is slightly undertuned. I would have liked to see it like 5 charges. Because compared to something like Rite of Seeking or Clairvoyance, this is just a bit hard to include. And if you're looking at Seekers, well, they don't really need that many extra spells to get extra clues, and they already have Fingerprint Kit, which does the same thing as this does. Now, we do have other multi-class cards. Medical Student is a 0 XP Guardian Seeker card, 2 cost, willpower icon, ally, Miskatonic, and Science traded. After the Medical Student enters play, heal 1 damage and 1 horror from the Investigator or ally asset at your location. Has a damage and a horror soak, and it takes up the ally slot. This is in a long tradition of cheap, disposable allies that have a powerful interplay ability. I really like this. I think it goes into a lot of potential decks and is kind of just nice as a little bit of healing, a little bit of soak, especially if you're playing with somebody who maybe uses their health or sanity as a resource, someone like Agnes or Kelvin or Parallel Agnes. This gives you a way to give that extra fuel and then, soak something, move on your life, call in some favors. A lot you can do with that. Next up, probably the favorite card announced out of Edge of the Earth so far, Blur, a Mystic and Rogue card, 1 XP, 2 cost, agility icon. It is a spell, uses 3 charges. Action, if Blur has charges remaining, evade. For this evasion attempt, you may use willpower instead of agility, and you get +1 skill value. If you succeed, spend a charge, and you may take an additional action this turn. If you succeed by 0, take 1 damage. Takes up the arcane slot. I love this card. I think it is so well designed. I think it's great in Mystics. I think it's great in some of the rogues. The one that care about evasion. Because you never have to use willpower instead of agility. So for someone like Finn or Trish or Skids, whose agility is just higher than their willpower, they can just use this, evade at 5, I think, for all of them. And then they get an extra action to use this with. Great. And for Mystics, this is a way to replace use their willpower instead of their agility for evasion. They get extra actions. They might have ways to recharge this or use having benefits for having multiple arcane slots used. I think this is cheap. This is a good way to deal with enemies. And one of the worst things that can happen in Arkham is when you get bogged down by a bunch of enemies and you have no way of dealing with them. And you're just out of action and you're in trouble. And this is never going to happen if you have a Blur with some charges on the table. Because you're not going to waste any charges while you're evading. Because if you fail, then you don't spend the charge. And if you succeed, you get an extra action, which means you can deal with multiple enemies. It is such a card that really solves one specific problem, but it's one specific problem that has cost me the game multiple times. And I can't wait to play this card. Finally, we have a big ol' 5 XP card. Another Guardian and Seeker card, Michael Lay, the Experienced Hunter, 4 cost, asset, intellect, combat, and wild icons. He's an ally and detective traded. He gives you +1 intellect and +1 combat. After you successfully investigate, place a resource from the token pool on Michael Lay as evidence to a maximum of 3 evidence. And a reaction when you initiate an attack, exhaust him and spend an evidence to deal +1 damage for this attack. He has 3 health and 3 sanity, which is a lot. He takes up that ally slot. I like this design. I think it's very interesting to encourage a kind of fighty cluey style that we haven't seen that much. Usually Guardians and Seekers prefer to specialize in either dealing with enemies or dealing with clues. And Michael's saying, no, you want to do both. You just want to get some investigations and some attacking. And it's kind of interesting because a lot of the time when Guardians do end up getting clue cards, they take the Tesla stuff like evidence or scene of the crime. But again, this card really wants you to go, no, I am committing to that intellect. I'm going to take basic investigate actions. And that's really cool. I like it. I like it a lot. I think it's interesting to see who's going to play this. There are a bunch of Guardians that have at least 3 intellect. With Michael, maybe with a couple other cards that can boost their intellect, they can easily get to a passable amount. And the ability is really, really strong, right? It's 3 vicious blows. And he's also got a bunch of health and sanity soak. So I can totally see this guy getting into a bunch of decks, giving you free extra bonus damage. I can also see him in Seeker decks, to be clear. I think one of the funniest decks I've heard about is using him in Ursula with the Ornate Bow, because the attack does not specify it has to be a combat attack, so you can just use it there. And then you're just using arrows that deal 4 damage a shot. So, yeah, I'm excited for this guy. 5 XP is a lot, but I think he's at least the proper amount of like awesome text to be a 5 XP card. Whether or not it actually turns out that you want him in practice, we'll have to see, but he's definitely exciting enough to be 5 XP. Okay, taking a break from the Antarctic for a moment, we're going to talk about the revised core set. So this is not really that much news, if I'm being honest, because it's mostly just the thing you already had, but now is slightly better. There are no new cards being printed in the revised core set, so if you already own a complete collection, you will not be getting any cards in there that you don't already own. But they have added a few more cards from the first couple of cycles that were XP cards to make upgrading in the core set a little bit better. Now, we don't know what those cards are, and I wouldn't expect there to be many, but the community has guessed that it might be something like Charisma, right? Or Relic Hunter from the Dunwich cycle, which were permanent cards that gave you additional slots. And those cards are such a staple in a lot of decks that not having them be in the core set is a little weird. And now that they have a chance to add them in, I'm very glad they are hopefully taking that chance, because we don't actually know yet, and I'm going to be very disappointed if they're not in there. In addition to that, the core set comes with a full playset of every card. They actually have enough cards to make every one of the 5 Investigator starter decks at the same time. Now, those decks are trash. They still are. But you can take the decks apart and then make 2 good 2-player decks. So hopefully that's a little bit better. More importantly, you now no longer have to buy 2 core sets. If you just buy 1 copy of the revised core set, you're all good. Which is great. There's some new art for the Investigators. There's some improved tokens, but the tokens are still functionally the same. They're just a little bit nicer now. And the scenario is still the same. So it's just the old core set, but now it's a little bit better. I don't know what the price is going to be. I'm assuming it's going to be a little bit higher to compensate for the bigger box, more cards, stuff like that. But if you are interested in getting into Arkham, this may be a reason to wait a little bit longer, or maybe see if you can find some tabletop simulator mods. There's totally, one out there. And if you know somebody who might be interested in getting into it as well, you can give them. This is the place to point them to, right? This is where they can start their collection, and it's great. Like it's just a quality of life improvement, right? There's nothing fundamentally changing to the game, but it's just a small upgrade. And if you already own 2 core sets and all the cards you need, there's no need to buy it. So it's not taking any money out of your pocket either. All right, on to more new stuff. It's Parallel Roland. So FFG has done a new Parallel Investigator. If you don't know what those are, a while ago, it's probably several months ago at this point, they released something called Parallel Daisy, which was a new set of deck building rules and investigator abilities for the Daisy Walker Investigator, which allowed you to combine in different ways and make this new kind of more complicated investigator that you could take and play just like any other investigator, and it was super cool. I'm slightly rambling, but I've covered Parallel Investigators on this channel before, so if you're interested, just go look those up, or look up the article, I think it's called Read or Die, on the FFG page. That should explain everything. Now, they've since done one for Parallel Skits, and Parallel Agnes, and now our newest addition is Parallel Roland, and presumably they're going to finish out the set with Parallel Wendy. Parallel Roland is still the Fed, and he still has the same stat line and the same health and sanity, but he has his new ability. At deck creation, choose 3 different directive assets to add to your deck. We're going to talk into what those do in a minute. And then a free triggered ability, flip a directive asset face down, ignoring its permanent keyword, limit once per game. And then a Elder Sign effect, +2, choose a directive asset, you may ignore its regulation ability this round. Okay, well none of that makes any sense if we don't know what these directives are, so let's talk about the directives. There are 5 of them, and you get to include 3 of them if you use the parallel Roland front instead of the original Roland front, which has the reaction after you kill an enemy, get a clue ability, in case you forgot. So each of these directives is a permanent asset that only goes in Roland, and each of them has a regulation ability. The regulation ability is a drawback. It makes it so you can't do certain things. So for example, you can't fight more than twice a round if you have the due diligence directive. However, each of them also has a powerful ability that kind of compensates or otherwise affects your deck. So for example, the due diligence has a free triggered ability during a skill test while investigating, evading, or parlaying. Exhaust the directive, you get +2 skill value for this test for each enemy engaged with you. Leave No Doubt makes it so that you can't move more than twice each round, but you get +3 sanity. Now if you've played a bunch of Roland, you know that his 5 sanity is a big sore thumb that probably got you driven insane more than once. So having +3 sanity makes him a 9/8, which is massive. If that's worth it for you for not being able to move around as much, well, take that directive. Red Tape means you cannot play more than 2 cards each round. That counts assets and events. But when you play an insight or tactic event, exhaust the directive, that event gains fast. Seek the Truth. While your location has 1 or more clues, you cannot commit cards to skill test unless you have discovered a clue this round. But after you discover a clue, if an enemy is at your location, exhaust the directive to draw a card. Free card draw. It's really good. Having already played him with Seek the Truth, it's really good. And then finally, regulation. You cannot consult experts. You cannot voluntarily assign damage or horror to ally assets, but you get +1 ally slot. So out of these 5 directives, you pick 3 to play. So you have 10 possible combinations, and that's not counting parallel backside or the advanced signatures. But and then you have these different drawbacks and different abilities that influence your gameplay. I kind of love it. I think it's very nuanced. There's a lot of options here. There's a lot of choices here. They change how you go about deck building. For example, cards like Handcuffs suddenly become very powerful if you have something like Seek the Truth or Due Diligence, because you now benefit from having enemies at your location that aren't doing anything. If you are using something like Consult Experts, you might not want to play certain allies that really rely on taking damage or horror, because you can't assign them damage or horror anymore. Note that some abilities like Beat Cop or Greater Wagner, which are deal this ally 1 damage in order to do a thing, still work, because that's not assigning damage to them, that's just them dealing damage. So I really like this design. I think it's great. I think it's interesting. I love that there's no obvious choice. There's a bunch of different options, and some of them work together better than others, but I could totally see reasons to run multiple different combinations. And with the entire card pool available to you, there's lots of options. So I really recommend that if you're into this sort of thing, go explore, go see all the different options and play whatever you feel like. On top of that, we also have a new backside, which has a deck size of 30, Guardian cards 0 to 3, so no 0 to 5 anymore, but Insight cards level 0 to 3, Tactic cards level 0 to 3, and Neutral cards 0 to 5. And if you take this backside, you also get 5 bonus experience at the start of the campaign. So a little bit like Father Mateo in that regard. In case you don't remember, Parallel Investigators, you can use either front or back or both or neither, really. So you have 4 different combinations of this Investigator now. You can mix and match however you feel like, and you can also add these advanced signatures. So the Roland 38 Special Advanced has an ability which gives you a little bit more combat compared to the original, and if you defeat an enemy and there's no clues in your location, you get an extra ammo back. And the cover-up advanced weakness requires you to clear it with 4 clues instead of 3 on the original. Now, the advanced signatures you can include by replacing both the advanced good card and the advanced weakness in your deck, sorry, the basic versions into the advanced versions. And if you play the scenario that came with this, which is the by the book scenario, which modifies Midnight Masks to go hunting for cultists, you can also use, you can also potentially upgrade one of them without, you can upgrade your gun without having to take the advanced weakness, or if you do very poorly, you might have to upgrade your weakness without taking your advanced signature. So it's very exciting. Go look up on the FFG page the by the book. It explains all of this in more detail if you're really want to get into the nitty gritty of it. I want to keep this video in a somewhat reasonable length, and we're already 30 minutes in, so I can't go into all the things, but I can tell you I'm really excited for this new Roland. I think he's very cool. And I love that they have this space now with these parallel investigators to print some more complicated abilities that really grind those deck building muscles. Okay, and then finally a FAQ update. So for those of you who don't know, the FAQ gets usually updated between cycles to include new errata and a new taboo list. We'll get into the taboo list in a minute. The new errata is pretty notable because there's quite a bit of it, and it is errata is supposed to apply to everyone. So the taboo list is optional, but the errata is designed to be kind of for everybody. And so there are a bunch of errata cards, or errata that we should probably talk about. Starting off, we have Wendy's Amulet. This is a core set, Wendy's signature cards, which lets you play events from the bottom of, from your discard pile as if they were in your hands. The problem with this card was with the forced ability, which had it that after you play an event, you were supposed to put it on the bottom of your deck instead of in your discard pile. However, some events didn't go directly into your discard pile and instead stayed around in play for a little bit before leaving play, at which point the forced ability would forget that they were supposed to be put on the bottom of your deck and they got back into the discard pile. This wasn't a huge problem for a little while because there were a couple of traps and lure that worked with this, but otherwise not that much interesting stuff. But then they printed Versatile, which allowed Wendy to take a card called Premonition from the Forgotten Age cycle. And Premonition basically lets you reveal a random Chaos token from the Chaos bag, and then it gets discarded the next time it is used. This is problematic because it goes into play, seals the Chaos token, and then the next time it would get used, the Premonition should go on the bottom of Wendy's deck, but because the forced ability didn't work properly, it instead just go back into the discard pile, and she can play it again, and again, and again. This Premonition Wendy deck could always have a Premonition in play for every single skill test in the entire game. And that's not great because it removes all the randomness from the Chaos bag. Basically, you always know which tokens you're going to pull next. So, kind of wisely, this was removed. Now, when an event is played or after an event is discarded from play, Wendy's Amulet puts it on the bottom of her deck. So that stops this interaction. It also potentially stops some other interactions coming in the Edge of the Earth, because the article does mention that there are also some interactions looking forward that they're trying to hit. Next up, we have a couple of very specific assets that kind of interacted weirdly. So the Hungering Blade and the Crystallizer of Dream both have this ability where, as an additional cost to put it into play, you had to search your bonded cards for some cards and then shuffle those into your deck. Now, this was a little bit confusing because there's a third card, the Summoned Hound, that also had a similar ability, but that one only applied when you played the Summoned Hound, not when it was put into play. Which matters because if you cheat the Summoned Hound into play, you don't have to put the weakness in. And so they are changing this so that both the Hungering Blade and the Crystallizer of Dreams now have the additional cost to play the card, meaning that if you cheat it into play, it is no longer required to shuffle the bonded cards in. And Yeztaroth, I have no idea how to pronounce that, which is Dexter Drake's replacement weakness, now also reads you cannot play assets or put assets into play. And so here we have the Summoned Hound, which indeed does have the additional cost to play it. And if you're looking for some way to put an asset into play that isn't playing it, for example, there's Sleight of Hand. Now you can actually Sleight of Hand the Hungering Blade without having to shuffle the weaknesses in, the Bloodlust in, which is pretty good because there were some shenanigans there where you could then no longer play it because you didn't have any more Bloodlust to shuffle into your deck. So yeah, overall a very minor but very nice quality of life improvement, and I'm just happy with it. Next up, two very minor changes. So seeking answers level 2 was a bit confusing for some people because the way that the text is written, it actually isn't replacing the normal investigate, meaning that by some rulings, or by some readings, you could actually say that this is supposed to discover 3 clues, 1 at your location and then 2 from among your location and connecting locations. This was always felt like a bit of a, I don't think that's how that's supposed to work, but technically going by the rules, that is how that works. And now they've clarified the card now instead, if you succeed, instead of discovering a clue, you discover 2 clues among your location and connecting location. So it's now a total of 2 and no more normal investigate. Finally, a super minor thing, but the level 3 bait and switch no longer has the tactic trait and instead has the trick trait, which the level 0 version also does. Presumably the reason they did this is that the only investigator that kind of cared about this was the just released parallel Roland, who can take level 3 tactics and could conceivably take bait or switch level 3, and they went, well, that's not supposed to be the case, so let's fix that. It doesn't really impact anybody else, I think, and let's be honest, bait and switch isn't the best card anyway, so it's probably fine. And then finally, a Guided by the Unseen errata. So Guided by the Unseen is a new card from Innsmouth, which you can use to search the top 3 cards of the investigator that's performing a skill test for a skill card for a card that can be committed, and then spend a secret to commit that card. The problem is that because you don't have to spend a secret to actually search, you could search as many times as you wanted. And because this ability was printed without a limit, there was nothing stopping you from using it infinite number of times every time you started a skill test. Which meant that you could pick exactly which skill card you wanted, and if you had research cards in your deck from the Dream Eaters expansion, like Astounding Revelation or Surprising Find, you could trigger their research abilities as soon as you played this and took a single skill test by just infinitely searching your deck until you'd hit all of them. That's obviously not intended, and so the card has been errataed to be limit once per test, which is still very good, because you still just get to search once per test for free, and only have to spend secrets if you actually care to commit a skill card you found there, or any card really, but probably a skill card. So this is still very powerful, and if you're doing a research deck, I still think you're interested in Guided by the Unseen, but at least now it's no longer just as soon as you play it and take a single skill test, you can search your entire deck. So that's better. And then finally, so the wall of text is on screen right now. If you care to read it, it's also just directly from the errata, but the basic thing is that Ancestral Knowledge, another card from the Infinite cycle, there was some confusion about face-down cards being attached to permanents or other cards you controlled. And the errata basically just clarifies, it doesn't even change anything, that cards attached to cards that you own or you control are cards you're allowed to look at. And when you are drawing one of those cards, you get to pick which card you want to draw. So for Ancestral Knowledge, you randomly pick 5 non-weakness skills. Those still have to be random. But then you get to look at those 5 cards whenever you want. And when you activate the free triggered ability to draw one of the cards, you get to pick which one you want to draw. That's great. It's awesome. It makes this card really, really strong. And I think we're going to see a lot of it in Secret decks. Alright, and then we're going on to the Taboo list. Okay, so a quick recap on what is the Taboo list. The Taboo list is an optional set of deck and card changes to make it more varied, more interesting, and to kind of do a little bit of power balancing. So the point is that Taboo list is optional, has always been optional, and is always designed to be optional. If you look at something like the errata that we just saw, the game is balanced around the idea that everybody uses the errata, right? They're going to be able to print cards events that attach to locations or do other stay in play things because they know everybody is going to be using the Wendy's Emblem errata. Taboo is optional. If you don't want to use a Taboo, you don't have to use Taboo. If you are a new player and you don't have a big collection, you don't have to use Taboo. Please only use Taboo if you feel like using the Taboo list. Because, let me tell you, it isn't mandatory. Please. I've seen a couple of people online, and I think it's getting less recently, so I hope it means it's working. But there have been some people who were worried or upset if they weren't using the taboo list because they felt they were playing the game wrong. You are not playing the game wrong if you are not using the taboo list. Okay, with that out of the way, let's talk about the actual changes. There are a couple. The biggest ones are a whole bunch of cards that now remove from the game when they're used to curb the amount of recursion and reusing the same card over and over again. There's also been some neat little changes that allow for more of a sniper archetype now. And a fan favorite core set card, Elusive, has been updated. I just now noticed that the text on this card's wrong. Whoops, sorry. Should have been Elusive right there. Awkward. Anyway, the new version is on the right, the old version on the left. Basically, Elusive has been a card that's been kind of a problem from the core set. Back when there weren't as many locations in the game, it wasn't a problem that Elusive let you teleport to any revealed location with no enemies. So you didn't have to, respect the limits of time and space. You could just teleport across the map. This was bad enough to get it a 2 XP taboo chain recently, or actually fairly early on, I think. It's been chained for a while. And that's a bit of a shame because while Elusive was definitely good, paying 2 XP for it always felt a little bad. So now what they've done is they've removed the 2 XP chain, and instead you only move a single location. You move to a connecting location with no enemies. This is great. This is exactly what I wanted Elusive to do, and actually something that was brought up in taboo discussions before is what if Elusive was just move one location? It's still good. It's in fact still kind of a shortcut if you have the money to burn. But it's no longer a teleport across the map, which makes teleportation cards, or rather very large movement cards, like the Atlas. I think it's called the Atlas. And there's also Astral Travel. They make those cards better. And I'm excited to be able to play Elusive in my decks again, because at 0 XP, the ability to kind of duck out of trouble, which is exactly what this card wanted to be doing, which is evading enemies, not teleporting across the world, is a cool effect and a nice effect, and I'm eager to play it again. Well, next up we have the Springfield, a weapon that I've never really used, probably because it wasn't very good. So the original Springfield 4 XP weapon that had 3 ammo, and then you could spend an ammo to fight with +3 combat and +2 damage, and it couldn't be used to attack enemies engaged with you, which was a big drawback and never really felt like it was worth it. So even with a -1 XP for a while on the taboo list, it wasn't good enough to make this card see play, so they decided to do something a little bit more drastic, and instead of the -1 XP, so it still costs 4 XP now, it now gets to target non-elite enemies at the one location away, and then ignoring the aloof and retaliate keywords. So it's become an actual sniper rifle that you can use to shoot into neighboring locations. That's kind of cool. I don't play that much Guardian, and I also don't play that much 3 or 4 player, but I'm trusting the rest of the community when they're saying that they're really excited for this card. I can totally see it, right? This lets you be very proactive in hunting down cultists. I mean, it still does 3 damage per shot, so if there's just a big enemy next door, bang, take his head off. Being able to ignore aloof can be very powerful. There's a couple of aloof enemies that you definitely don't mind, even if you're completely overkilling them. You don't mind just going, okay, you're dead now. And the retaliate keyword is always a bit of a problem, let's be honest. It does hurt. The cannot be used to attack enemies engaged with you is still a problem, and the fact that this is two-handed means that you either need some kind of backup weapon and using Bandolier to hold multiple hand slots, or maybe you're using some fight events to compensate. But I like this a lot more because at the very least it feels like this card is not just worse than something like, say, the Lightning Gun. Because once Lightning Gun came out, this card was never seen again, and now I hope it gets its time in the light again. Also, note that it is up to 1 location away from its standard range, and the reason why that is because Telescopic Sight also exists. And this also lets you shoot up to 1 location more away. So when combining Telescopic Sight and the Springfield, you get to shoot 2 locations away. It's also worth saying that the Telescopic Sight has also been tabooed to no longer be attached asset cannot be used to attack enemies engaged with you. So like the Springfield, the telescopic sight made that whatever gun you attached it to couldn't be used to shoot enemies that were engaged with you. That no longer happens because presumably your character just doesn't use the sight when they're shooting at somebody who's engaged with them. This makes the telescopic sight an attachment you might put on something like a lightning gun or the what's the big one from the BAR from Forgotten Age, which lets you do a sort of similar thing to the Springfield with a long range shot, and putting this on the Springfield means that you can now shoot up to 2 locations away. It's pretty cool. Then there's a big old set of cards that now remove from the game when they are used. So Eucatastrophe, 3 Aces, Pendant of the Queen, which is an asset that when it runs out of charges, it removes from the game. A Watchful Piece and Hollow, all now removed from the game. This is a big step in the direction of curbing recursion. I think Eucatastrophe was arguably the easiest to recur because there were 2 survivors whose Elder Sign effects literally let them get this back from the discard pile, Yorick and Silas if he's using Resourceful, which meant that you could be using this card over and over and over again, and that just wasn't balanced. It just meant that any skill test, if you ever hit skill value 0, you were just Elder Signing instead. 3 Aces, I think, is kind of a bite blow of Seeker cards, getting Rogue cards to boot. But it was, for some Seeker decks, very easy to get 3 Aces together multiple times in a game, which just gave you 3 more cards, 3 more resources, and an automatically successful test. So now, after the first time you've done this, you don't get to do it again. Append of the Queen is still a very, very powerful card, and I still don't like that it still hasn't been tabooed to be non-elite enemies. But now, the only way to get more use out of it is to give it more charges. The old version, when it ran out of charges, it broke back into its little segment of Onyx pieces. And then you put those back into your deck, and then when you drew them again, you could assemble the pendant again. Sometimes you could assemble the pendant more than once in the same turn, which was just broken. It was just broken, or you could reassemble it the turn it broke. This is much better. You can still get more uses out of it by just giving it more charges with cards like Enraptured or the Eldritch Sophists from Innsmouth, but it is no longer nearly as abuse prone, and that does also mean that the segments of Onyx have been unchained. They were 4 XP a piece, and now they are, 4 XP for the set, now it's a 1 XP for the set again. A Watchful Piece is probably the biggest offender of recursion. Basically, you would have to spend 5 Bless tokens, return them to the token pool, and then you could skip the draw and counter step of the Mythos phase. Problematically, for survivors, it wasn't too hard to play this card multiple times in a game. 4 or 5 times is fairly trivial, and more than that is still doable. And it just means that you have to draw so many fewer encounter cards that it was not fun anymore. Like, it just made the game too easy. So I'm very glad they hit this one. Next up is Hallow, which I understand why they did it, because it's presumably for the exact same reason that they hit Watchful Piece. But it feels a little bad because unlike Watchful Piece, Hallow really isn't nearly as broken. It's also a lot more expensive to do because Hallow requires a 3-cost event that lets you remove 1 Doom from any card in play. While it is technically possible to set up loops where you could have infinite Doom basically by always removing 1 Doom every single turn, it requires Parallel Agnes, I think, to be most reliable, but there are ways of shenanigansing it. It just, Hallow, compared to a Watchful Piece at least, is a bit underperforming because removing 1 Doom is not the same as skipping an encounter, the entire draw and counter step. That being said, it probably still was too good to be doing this, multiple times in the game, and now, you get to do it once, which I think is fair. I don't expect to be seeing a lot of Hallow anymore, but I think it's a fairly balanced now. And I think that wraps it up because that's the entire Taboo list. There was a lot of news. I hope you all got through it. I know I did. It was a lot. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to find me, I'm on Discord. We're into hashtag 4077. But I'm also in the Mythosbusters server. You can go to discord.gg/Mythosbusters to join the server. That's an invite link that never expires. You can just ping me in that server to let me know if you have any questions, if you just want to tell me this video is awesome, whatever. I'm also on Twitter now. I'm on twitter.com/untilarkham. Give me a follow, I guess. I'm not great at this whole social media thing, but if you want to chat or just, send Arkham pictures to me, I'm totally cool with that. If you are joining the Discord, join the campaign play along. This is the event where every week we play the same scenario as a community, basically. We're currently just starting Forgotten Age. It's really cool. We have a limited card pool. There's another video I made last week, maybe a little longer ago. I've lost track of time. If you want to read or want to hear about the rules, go watch that video again. And I guess that's kind of it. Subscribe if you feel like it. I really am not going to try to bother making people forcing to, or making them feel like they have to subscribe. But I am done with schoolwork for the year, so for the next couple of months, I'm hoping to upload more. Thank you very much for watching. If you stuck it out, I'm seriously impressed. And I'll be seeing you until the end of time.